Art Extension agent, said, this showed up on my desk. It's supposed to go to the garden, so it was this little rubber mallet.
All right. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Karen, will we please have a roll call?
Okay, for the planning commission members, Corby Chappelle,
Here?
Sally Cohen. Here. Rebecca Jay.
Here,
Alex Froskovus,
Here.
Kate Schwarzler. Here. Jose Vasquez.
Here.
Historic Preservation Commission members, Rebecca Berry is absent and is excused. Liz Boyer.
Here.
And Liz is here via Zoom. Ann Devane. Here. Jennifer Flores. Beth Niket is absent and excused. Curtis Tidmore.
Here.
John Young.
Here. All right, well, good evening, everybody. I'm glad everybody could make it who's here. We have a joint work session tonight. This is a joint work session of the Independence Planning Commission and the Historic Preservation Commission. The general public is invited. Is invited to attend and view the meeting. Typically, no public input or comments to be received tonight. So we'll move right over to Fred and have a staff memo.
Yeah, so like I was sort of saying here, feels good to get together every now and again. So that's really what we're doing tonight is getting together. I figure it's the end of the year. It's a good time to sort of think about some of the stuff that we've actually accomplished this year, some of the stuff that's out there. And I mean, shoot, like as public officials, so often we don't actually get to like look back and sort of celebrate like, wow, we actually did some stuff this year, which is like, I mean, it's a good thing. And you know what, like I've been here now for like 3.5 years. Like in 3.5 years, we have done a whole ton of stuff. Like, and so it just sort of seemed like a good chance to sort of like look back and think about some of the stuff that we did this year. And then also sort of anticipate where we're going, what are some of the things on the horizon, and then particularly in regards to certain things like infill. Both of you boards have encountered stuff related to infill, be it infill in a residential neighborhood or infill in the historic district. And I think it's a good chance to sort of look at our code a little bit and say, okay, what are some additional things potentially we can do to be prepared for what we know is going to happen. We know that there's going to be additional infill development, and we just want to be prepared. So some of the things, so that's really sort of the outline for tonight. We'll sort of fly over quick some of the projects that we got done this last year, just to acknowledge them. I will, and then we'll get into more of a discussion about some of the infill standards. I would, just because she hasn't been to either one of your meetings yet, we do have this new city manager here, Kenna West, and so just wanted to make sure that all of you folks can put a face with a name. So that's Kenna over there.
Hi. Very nice to see you all.
So anyways, want to say anything, Kenna, real quick?
No, I just, the normal, thank you very much for serving. I know you are all long-term members and what you do is important to what we do. We know about you and your dedication is astounding. Fred's right, as I've been watching and learning, the work you've done is excellent and not always easy. So thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, so just some of the stuff that's happened. I mean, Historic Preservation Commission, we've reviewed the Women's Club twice. We did a new outdoor cover for Gilgamesh that's going up right now. We did the new single family house across the street. We did 710 Monmouth, that white house at the corner of 7th and Monmouth. We did an ADU at 364 South 4th, and then we did take a look at that changes to notice requirements. That was this year. We also gave out a Historic Preservation Award, and I don't know, did I ever show you folks the video for the Historic Preservation Award? All right, let's did I show that?
Not this year's.
Okay, so let's go ahead and I had Karen, try and, have that video ready. Let's see if we can, actually just take a look at it. We'll see. So, it's a nice little video, like it was really cool to be, it was cool to be able to, acknowledge some of the work that he's done, because he did do also a house at 10th and Monmouth. He's done a whole bunch of houses in town. And he did the pink house as well. So it was really, he moved the pink house, and then he was the one that painted it pink, right? And so, I mean, it was really cool to be able to recognize him with that award. I mean, that is an amazing thing about what the Historic Preservation Commission does as a certified local government. There is a little pot of money that comes through the state every 2 years. We're able to sort of identify what projects actually get a lift, would benefit from that money. We use that in part for that award this last time around. We also funded a project at South Main to redo a porch at the White House, just down that block. I forgot what the exact address.
They ended up taking the money.
They ended up taking the money, and the porch looks very nice. So
There's been stipulation about work they were thinking about doing. If they took the money, they wouldn't be able to do it.
yeah,
Right.
it's true. And so that money is going to be coming in, or we're going to apply for it again this next year. So one of the projects that we'll definitely have this coming year is talking about how best to expend that money. But I do like the award. I think that's a cool thing to be able to do. Some of the stuff that Planning Commission did this year, let's get back in here. We reviewed a couple of subdivisions, a couple on Seventh. We looked at the wastewater facilities plan. We looked at zoning map revisions. We changed duplex standards. We did a couple of zoning changes. We changed the zoning map. We removed the requirement for garages in residential zones, whole bunch of stuff. And I actually printed out the goals for 2022 that I gave out on January 3rd. And the projects on the list, discussions of parking. We actually got a grant to discuss parking, so we'll be doing that. Not last year, but this next year. We still need to rewrite the independent sign code. We did the rewrite of the independence code to allow duplexes in all residential zones. We did that. We had the public hearing on wastewater system facilities plan. We did the zoning map changes. We did have the central townage plan, which is going to be some work around the Central Plaza area on the list for last year. We haven't actually started that project yet because it's still going through contract negotiations with ODOT. But that will start next year, hopefully. Participation in and review of the housing needs analysis, that's ongoing, and then review of development projects. So, I mean, it's pretty incredible to sort of say like, whoa, hey, we actually did something. Like we're actually doing something. So that's cool.
That's not incredible, that's people working together, and that's what we do.
Yeah, there you go. And so, I mean, that's what, I mean, it's
That's
anyway,
us.
yeah, it's good. And so it's good to stop and recognize that. So I'll just sort of list upcoming projects. If you haven't heard, we're gonna get a trolley. Did you folks see that trolley video that
Yeah, that was great.
so that we have one trolley in town, we're still waiting for the delivery of the others. We're still doing the housing needs analysis. We're gonna be doing a downtown parking plan this next year, hopefully. We did get a grant for that, and we are gonna be doing the central townage project. Other things, the sign code change, at a certain point, we will have to amend the sign code and infill standards. So let's potentially infill standards. So anyways, sort of recognizing that, I think that let's sort of go into, are there any questions about any of that stuff at all? All right, so then let's start going into exactly how infill standards work. And Karen, can you get that video up, please? The other one. Just from Santa Rosa. How's it real quick, Karen? I should give you a little context for this video. So what this guy's going to talk about is essentially how zoning works a little bit. And so I feel like it's a good sort of primer on how zoning works, because I think it's really important that if we want to tweak how our zoning works, we actually understand some of the things that it can do. And I found this, I feel like the way he sort of breaks it down is fairly clear. It's only going to be about 5 minutes so that we watch. So go for it, Karen. You make a picture. And so stutter it. So I show you that because, I mean, fundamentally, our zoning code works exactly that way, right? That breakdown of lot scale and house scale, like, I mean, that's fundamentally how our zoning code works, right? And so I'll hand out this map here, and shoot, I should give, I'll give out, you pass those down, and then I'll give you one of these.
Thank you.
Oh, you pass those. And so, I mean, fundamentally, that's how our zoning code works too. And as you look at this map, and you can pull up this map here, fundamentally, when you look at our mixed-use pedestrian-friendly zone, that is designed to be a block scale, sort of development type. When you look at the standards, how they work, they require, oh, and I should have kept one of this picture, around. When you look at how the standards work, and I tried to depict how the standards work in this image here, when you look at the standards, in the mixed-use pedestrian-friendly zone, we actually have a minimum height that the downtown is supposed to have, except in what we created, the historic residential overlay. The minimum height is 15 feet high. In the downtown overlay, all buildings are supposed to be 2 stories tall, so that essentially is a 25-foot tall building. The maximum height is 45 feet. So it's fairly high, and there's a bonus density if you incorporate certain things like 3-bedroom apartments, if you incorporate a roof garden or something like that, various things. So you could get up to 55 feet in the downtown, in the mixed-use pedestrian-friendly zone. The setbacks in the zone, the mixed-use pedestrian-friendly zone, there are no setbacks. That there is even a minimum lot coverage. It says 50% of the lot should be covered by a building in the downtown overlay zone. It can be up to 100% of the lot be covered by a building in the mixed-use pedestrian-friendly zone. The only limitation is where you're going to accommodate the parking. If you incorporated structured parking, potentially you could cover that entire lot. Oh, well, in front by this, if this is a street out here. Oh, I'm sorry. The green, this is depicting the minimum building size here. The red depicts sort of the maximum building size. This is supposed to be, say, a 5,000 square foot lot, right? This too is a 5,000 square foot lot, let's say. For the residential, the house scale, for that, the height allowed is a maximum of 35 feet, which is much taller than many of our existing single-family residential neighborhoods. Just want to throw that out there. It is also not to the peak of the building. It is to the midpoint of the highest roof, which means you could have potentially like a 40-foot tall building in that zone. The setbacks, you can see there, lot coverage is different. It's 40%, and that's a maximum. And the parking, you just need to make sure that any garage is 4 feet behind the front facade. Now I show you this because ultimately I do think that as we are going, the existing standards as they exist, perhaps might cause some growing pains as people look and they say, what, a 35-foot tall residential structure can go right next to me? And that's like, I mean, even a single family home at 35 feet feels large. I mean, that's
overwhelming.
so, I mean, so just be aware that those standards are out there. Also, in the downtown overlay zone, or in the downtown zone, excuse me, mixed-use pedestrian friendly, you'll remember that we sort of recognized that we had block scale buildings allowed right next to existing historic single family homes. And we went in and we created the historic residential overlay. And I sort of marked those on this map here of that historic residential overlay. But what sort of in reflecting on this, what becomes clear is there's a whole bunch of other areas that could potentially allow is block scale buildings that are outside of the district, let's say, even in the district. For example, the half block directly across the street, the half block across from the movie theater, all of those sorts of things. But I mean, it's interesting when you look outside of the district, which the historic residential overlay does not apply to at all, right? A whole bunch of block scale buildings could be built throughout the rest of that district as well. So for instance, the public workshops are zoned mixed use pedestrian and friendly commercial. If the city ever moved and sold that, that could be a significantly taller building beyond back there.
The colors,
Yeah,
okay. So the brown
oh yeah,
is that mixed use?
that's the mixed use pedestrian friendly commercial transitional, the one that we created this last year for the duplexes.
Okay, and
specifically.
so then, the dark pink is what?
Downtown River, are you talking about
No.
this one?
No, the darker pink.
The red right here is a mixed use pedestrian friendly commercial, and that's specifically the downtown zone. Thank you for,
Okay,
I
and so then
I
what's
should
the
have
light
oriented
pink?
it. The light pink is the downtown riverfront zone, so that's where things like the apartments and
Right.
everything have been going. And I'll just point out, like, certain areas like the downtown riverfront zone also allow block scale buildings, and they're not in the historic residential overlay,
And then what about, okay, so what
or
about
the historic district, and all, excuse me.
by the, but is this by the bridge?
Yep,
Okay, what's this?
oh, that right there is right back here, it's
Well, I
probably,
know where it is,
it's-
I mean, what kind of code is
it's
that?
mixed use pedestrian friendly commercial, but it's probably
Not.
floodplain or floodway,
Okay,
so,
alright. And then what's the RH down here?
that's a high density residential.
And then the IL is.
The IL is
is
light
that-
industrial,
Is that right back here?
yeah,
And
So-
then the PS?
the PS is public service, yep, thank you, I should have spelled that out
Oh,
better.
that's okay. You're right here, so thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I guess the point that I wanted to make is like, there's a lot of spaces that might potentially allow block scale buildings around here. So, and I guess I just wanted to sort of raise the issue and say, is that a problem or not? Now, I'll sort of give you some context on why so much of this area around here is zoned commercial. Way back when we did the 2020 plan, we wanted to develop a vibrant downtown. That was part of the plan for the city, and I think that was what, 2000 or whatever, when they did the 2020 plan. And when they went through the commercial and industrial building lands analysis, they identified a deficiency in commercial land, and they said, we don't want to sprawl out, we don't want to zone more industrial land or commercial land. So they focused the growth around here. And they specifically spelled it out in the land use and urbanization element. It says Independence rezoned approximately 7.9 acres in downtown and the downtown area to commercial retail to provide additional opportunities for commercial development and strengthen the downtown as a primary commercial area within the city. It says to support, so essentially it's just saying, they said they made the strategic choice. We want downtown to be the vibrant center of this community. And so at that point, they identified, hey, we want to have these block scale buildings, these,
Well, but wait a minute, the block scale buildings are not homes,
right?
so.
What you're still trying to do is functionally prevent, or at least make sure that any infill construction matches the feel of existing neighborhoods. I mean, that's what this discussion is Well, or maybe it's not.
Maybe,
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but what,
Well, that's what we're
that,
talking
No, no,
about.
right,
that-
right.
that's
That's-
fundamentally the issue.
The
So
issue.
yes,
As it is right
The problem
now.
is there's two opposing forces.
Yeah.
And we're trying
Right.
to some sort of compromise.
Yeah,
Right, between the two.
and that's why I wanted all of us in the same room to have this conversation, because fundamentally, I mean, it's a challenging, it's a very challenging issue. And
Well, yeah,
the guys-
especially since we're growing so much too, that, you know.
yeah, and the guy's point at the very start of the guys at the very start of the video, like, hey, zoning in a lot of ways is intended to prevent what we don't want happen rather than actually create a vision of what we do want to happen. And
Right.
it's like, okay, I totally believe that's the case. So, okay, how do we then take this step to anticipate what might occur and what we actually want to achieve?
what do we
Well,
want infill to actually look like?
Exactly.
And he did say that form-based code was protection-based.
Well, haven't we pretty much addressed that with massive scale in the historic district?
Now that's it,
Except
that's,
Except that if you look at this map, there's blocks with historic homes on them that are not within the historic overlay zone. So that's where we screwed up. We left blocks out of it.
but
And so now.
I'm sorry, are you talking about outside the district or inside the
No,
district?
within the district. We left blocks out of it, like the one across the street from my house is not in the historic overlay. The one on Second Street, not in the historic overlay, where that big empty lot is. So
Yeah.
that's where we screwed up and didn't.
Well,
include
okay,
those.
so that's kind of why we're here. So let's try to fix it.
That's what we're saying.
Okay, so if we just apply the historic overlay,
Then they're
That's two
required
small
to
areas.
build according to the historic code
Which
that
is,
we
more-
created over the
or-
course of.
isn't
will
the
prevent
historic
that
code more
first-
form-based?
it'll prevent that first example you were showing.
Yes, the horrible big.
yeah, well, I mean, and that's specifically why we went through and did that historic residential overlay. Zone was specifically for,
Since we did it, there's been a change of opinion on the commission.
Isn't it
We
been the
left a
code?
couple areas out. So which areas specifically are we looking at recommending including the block across the street?
Here, the one across the street from my
Where
house,
else?
the one on Second Street, across from,
What,
I guess it's up,
the parking lot of the,
No, it's
No,
where the house that
it's a
the
big
nuisance
vacant lot
house
right
and then
now.
that block house next to it.
Well, the one where the vacant lot is too, is not on the historic overlay, right? Which one?
Right, we're talking about that whole block on that side.
Right, that block,
On Main Street.
no, on Second Street.
Oh, hold it. I thought you were talking about Main Street across
Yeah,
from
that's what I-
where you live.
That one too.
Okay, why are we looking at, you're
I
also
just
talking
went- I
about
went down
the,
a list. That's all. You asked me where. and
I
was like,
gotcha. Are you saying that we should also include the half block across from the movie theater?
Well, we do have two historic homes on that
yeah,
block.
we do.
Mhm.
They're not included, that's true. And one of them just changed hands too. The
Mhm.
sign
Yes,
is
it did.
fine, you
Yes.
know, and it looks like they might have painted it.
Correct. James Sorcerers.
But anyway, aren't we really kind of always, we're really thinking we should be about form-based code as opposed to like the block scale or the house scale? And do we want to encourage the house scale, you know, because that's.
well,
as opposed to
I
the
do
block
think
scale.
that that's a really important conversation to have.
Well,
I
let's do it.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I feel like that's part of what I'd like to, that's part of what I'd like to talk about.
Now, what about the fact that we're over 10,000 people?
Yes.
Does that muddy everything too,
So that we'll probably talk about that.
on our next get together?
Well, if we spend a lot of time talking about this, then potentially we won't talk about residential as much. the issue probably isn't in the historic district. The issue is probably in another one of those ones where it's outside of the historic district, where we have standards right now in the historic district, where if you are putting a single family home in, you have to consider your neighbors.
Right.
Whereas if
It's
you
not-
do it outside the district, we don't have any sort of standards that say, consider your neighbors in terms of scale or anything like that. We have,
The
planning commission doesn't have any.
No.
we have, and I would be happy to show you, how all the standards work. And I told Karen to be ready to pull up the code a little bit. But perhaps we should focus on the commercial areas first before we get into the residential, because the residential is probably going to be more of a planning commission sort of discussion, but I mean,
Yeah,
it
but
is,
the residential is one that a lot of people are pushing back on right now. You know, like over on 7th Street, I live on the corner of 6th and Spruce, so 7th Street where, you know, those buildings are gonna go in, a lot of people around me don't like that kind of thing that's happening. Also, I think it's a 5-plex that's on 7th Street, right near Cedar.
Five.
I think with Fred's get at, since this is a joint meeting, we should work on the stuff that applies to both commissions.
Well,
I thought it would be fine if we could talk about both, but I thought if we're gonna get in the weeds in the commercial area, then let's get in the weeds in the commercial area, because the time's probably best spent there.
It seems like that's one of the biggest conflict areas to me. Do you want commercial areas or do you want historic homes preserved? How do you want to preserve historic homes? What about 2- and 3-story historic buildings? Do you want to allow residences above? How do we encourage that sort of infill and utilization of space and continue to have the same character downtown? But as Fred was saying, they made a conscious choice 3 years ago to continue to strive to have businesses in the downtown area. So that has to be accommodated because that's what.
Right, and I mean, that was, thank you, Becky, because when it went through the 2040 plan, one of the game changer projects is expanded downtown revitalization and beautification. And one of the things that it mentions is west and southward expansion of the downtown district, including comprehensive streetscape and signage improvements. So, and that says to 2nd and C Street, but it says west and southward expansion of the downtown district. So, so there is still the identified priority to move downtown south and west.
How would you move it west? Aren't those all pretty much historic properties?
I think it's sort of looking,
Well,
Kind of southwest.
yeah,
Okay.
something like potentially even that.
Okay.
Which I mean gets us back to the thing that there are some buildings that are just not in the historic, or there are some lots that are just not in the historic district.
Or there are some lots that don't really have historic buildings. So if those come down, how are they going to be refashioned?
Right, and that was what we focused on with the historic residential overlay. Sort of look at your neighbors and try and match a scale and everything like that. It becomes a whole lot more challenging when for instance, when we did the historic residential overlay, there was one structure on that block.
on that block from one.
Yeah, and so like, how do you look at your neighbors to sort of judge how to scale the structure and everything like that? So it's not just, I don't think it's just a matter of going in and changing the map.
Excuse me, real quick, commissioners, if I could remind everybody to speak up just a little bit. I'm getting some feedback that some of the commissioners are very hard to hear.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, I guess let's just sort of talk over the idea. Does it make sense to expand the historic residential overlay? And if so, potentially where?
So I think fundamentally, one of the questions is also how much flexibility do we want to allow in terms of the character of what's being built downtown? So do you take the existing historic structures and say we're going to preserve them, but then allow for potentially new structures coming in to have a different look and feel to them? Still maybe staying within the same form, the same height, et cetera, but are we trying to kind of keep a snapshot in time? Or are we allowing for there to be a little bit of a mix of different styles and different types downtown?
Well, we do have standards about you have to look around
Sure.
what's there right now.
There's no requirement for new construction that it's a snapshot in time that has to look, so that's already addressed in the overlay, basically. We're more about size and scale and setbacks. And.
But he's talking about adjacent to the overlay, I think, right? Isn't that what we're talking about? The stuff that's not within, that's not geographically confined in the historic overlay, but the stuff that's adjacent and around.
Yeah,
Zone commercial, that's the, not the friction point, but that's where, I think that's what we're trying to
Right.
nail down. So because it's, well, within the geographic
Sure.
overlay,
Yeah.
that's set, that's like sort of,
yeah.
but for the rest, but for the stuff that's sort of in the fringe. What do
So
we,
that's where when Jennifer picked out two particular spots,
Three.
yeah,
three,
that are outside the overlay, so they would be ripe for probably conflict.
Garbage,
Yeah. Well, but, you know, like what Fred was talking about, I mean, you know, form-based code, you know, I mean, that's the thing, you know,
I mean, so.
as opposed to what it was before, because what we're dealing with now is, what was the other one? that we
Well,
talked
it's-
about?
It's use based, or but I mean, even our standards right now, in a lot of ways, I mean, the way that he sort of depicts how the standards work, like, I mean, it's based on numbers, and numbers fundamentally, like, you can't look at numbers and like figure out how a city's gonna look in a lot of ways, right? Like,
Well, yeah.
hey, 15-foot front yard setback, 5-foot side yard setbacks, 35-foot tall. Then height limit, it's like, you don't, that, in a lot of ways, that's just not an effective way to sort of build a community. And so I think his point about that is really good. And now I'll just say that we do have those standards, but we also have like residential design standards. We also have commercial design standards that sort of overlay on top of those, that influence how a building looks and feels and all of that sort of stuff. But I mean, in certain places, if a block scale building goes in, people are gonna think, wow, that's interesting. It's a transition. Now, I'll just say too, if somebody catches, I mean, this is part of the reason why it would have been great to have addressed this when we did this originally, and included whatever areas we were including originally, because I mean, like Alex was saying, it's, at this point, it's done, right? Any application that comes in under these standards has to be processed in accord with those ways. If somebody were to hear that we're doing this, and considering these changes, they could submit an application.
That's nothing new. I mean,
I know.
it would have happened before if they were inclined to do so, so.
Right, so I
Doing
mean,
it
just,
then or now doesn't change the reality.
yeah, so I'll just say, I mean, beware that might happen if we do go down this, road. All right, so let's talk about the 3 areas that Jennifer had brought up, and if we do want to potentially consider changes to those areas. And shoot, Karen, if you could pull up Google Maps, that would be awesome, because then we can actually take a look at them. Google Maps. We should be all fairly familiar. One is across the street. There's essentially 4 lots over there. 2 have, there's a house on the corner, a single family home. I'm not certain if it's a contributing structure or not. The one right next to it is a new structure that's just going up, and then there's 2 lots next to that.
One
That,
with the staircase going.
yeah. Do you, can you drop a pin there? Or can you drop a guide to walk around there? It's just the guide. Grab this way down here.
You know, we did go through planning and approval and everything for the new house that's being built right across the street. You know, that is like kind of what we're talking about, you know, it's a historic preservation. They had to build within our surrounding, taking a look at what was going on. So you can see what kind of a new, it's brand new, but it's still been built according to the structure, to what is existing, you know, so that's kind of where we come from a little bit too.
But they could have absolutely put up a block scale building.
Oh, yeah, that's. Yeah.
The reason that they had to go through the overlay or the standards is because we're putting a single family house and yeah.
So my question is, for some or even all the areas, is there any kind of intermediate step that's in between block scale?
Yeah.
And, you know what I'm
And
saying?
house scale.
Right, like modified block scale. I've seen a lot of old, like turn of the 1900s buildings in with homes like these in bigger cities where they're block scale buildings, but they've got courtyards and
Yeah, they're like.
setback and they blend in, but function as a block scale building in a residential zone.
Well,
Well-
remember that picture that the guy had up in the presentation of the two, they both have the same like dimensions on the lot. And one was like a 4-story,
No, they
Same
have
density.
the same density.
same
Same
density.
No, I'm not
So-
talking
But
about.
it
So
was a
what-
nice
And
looking-
so what you're essentially saying is, I mean, it's the image that he had, which it's like sort of a spectrum, right? Where it's like the farthest is rural and the most intense is like a tower.
One tower,
And
right.
like identifying, yeah, where in that actually might make sense.
But are you asking about having, what I hear you talking about is having like in large cities where you have large apartment buildings that have courtyards and frontage area and they,
But still fit in with homes next door.
right.
Right.
Well, that's kind of maybe an expanded house scale.
Possibly, but I'm thinking about instead of going, I mean, for blocks where we've got a majority of the block empty, maybe there's an intermediate step that will make everyone mostly happy.
It gives you your infill, keeps up with historic outlines. And
Right,
Gives
that's
you
my question.
residential
I'm
areas.
not sure how to get to there, or if it's even desired by the majority of people in the room or the community, but I've seen it work, and I don't know the standards.
Whether that's a design standard driven thing or
Or-
whether that's a.
Or numbers.
Yeah, like a density, yeah.
Right, I don't know if it's design standard or a numbers thing where it's height, density, setbacks.
Well, no, but that's what he said, that, you know, that kind of thinking.
Yeah, but how do you encourage the right look, but
Yes.
still meeting the metrics and still having the, like, sort of the form and style? of the rest of
Exactly, and
the block?
that's the tough question, which we look to you because you have all those answers.
Right, and I, at this point, I don't, and so I guess that's part of, I mean, and so are we talking specifically that we would want something like this within these couple of historic areas that we're talking about that are not included within the overlay? Or is this something that we would want to expand potentially out of the district as well to some of these other properties?
Oh, I think we should try to expand it.
I think we should figure out what the consensus is here, because we're all kind of spitballing here. And there's some people that aren't even talking, and let's get a feel for what, like, name some options, and we can raise our hands if we kind of like that idea.
Name some options. Okay.
Well, first of all, is to just,
First, because we talked about the one
Yeah.
right here.
Okay, so we got the one right here.
Right, yeah.
So should this be part of that historic residential overlay? Is this the place where it's right across from this building, which is a block scale building?
It's a stairway to heaven.
What used to be there? I remember
A house.
houses. There were
Those
houses.
houses, yeah.
There's no.
And there is a house there now. Yeah. All right, so. let
so
me-
there's some here that want to do the overlay for that block as well. And then I made a suggestion, maybe an intermediate, where it's not what it is now, but not a complete change over to the overlay.
But,
I don't even
you
know
know,
if
if
that's
somebody
possible.
wants to build a house there, across the
They
street.
still could.
Well, they've got an example because of the one that the people are just finishing up in the next block.
But like
But
you
I think
said, they could have actually put something a lot bigger.
Right, I think we also have to consider that we're not looking at what it looks like today, we're also looking at what do we want our community to look like 15, 20 years down the road, and what do we need to put in place to be able to allow our commercial zone to expand, that it's not all going to be residential, and we need that commercial zone
And
as
see,
well.
that's the vision that they're trying to expand south and west. That's the opposing forces I was
Right,
talking about. And maybe instead of going for the full out overlay, something,
Well, but we still did approve for that place that's right next to you.
well,
And that's that's a mixed use building. The one that's next to Jennifer, that we approved a couple of meetings ago. That's mixed use.
the,
I
right,
didn't even list that one in the.
No,
That's-
yeah, you should, because
Yeah,
I
that's
think
a
that's
nice
a
building.
perfect example of what we should be doing all along. What's going in. Jennifer's house is the greenhouse in the next, immediately across the street in the next block. Okay. We approved like 2 meetings ago. Is there any way to get that information to show the planning commission? It's gonna be a mixed use
So,
building.
With a big body.
And it's gonna have apartments and also a business on it. Okay, so there's your commercial stuff, but it's not an overwhelming, you know, urban commercial kind of a situation. It's more in tune with the commercial that's down further north on Main Street.
It will be south of your house?
right. So if we had the
I'll,
same, if we had the same,
I'll pull it up.
So if we do that, align,
A mixed use building with commercial
First floor.
stuff on the first floor and then apartments, you know.
and it only went up, but it fits in where it is, you know,
But
in other
it's
words.
not,
It's exactly like
required to match what's on the blog, so that it's not.
Because it's
ugly
in the
and-
overlay, right? Is that what you're
Yeah.
doing? So, yeah.
It's not ugly, it's not blocky, it's not square, it's not completely out of line with our historic downtown.
Right, and it's still there's commercial in there, you know, so.
It's
It's
like
not-
the old buildings we have downtown, that the upstairs apartments are just not being used.
Right,
Um,
those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
But
keeps
anyway,
it
that
moving.
kind of a thing.
But there are grants
I'm
out
sorry.
there.
Don't get any
I'm gonna,
information,
I'm gonna
That
get
just
that.
got one and they're building up.
because I think don't you think that's in the middle of what you're talking about?
no,
Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, I think, I believe, I mean, so the city's plan for expansion for commercial downtown, I think is like, I'm a true believer probably, so, you know, just really bathing in the Kool-Aid of vibrant downtown and all the things. And so an expansion for residential seems like not my top choice, I would say.
okay, I used residential as an example, but
Yeah.
there are blocks, smaller block scale buildings that
That are probably are mixed use, right? First floor
Right,
commercial,
like-
second, third floor.
basically like the Cooper building.
And I think that's the stuff that I think we're all
Mhm.
probably, you know, in favor of the mixed use, higher density residential for downtown with the commercial option, you know, at least on the first floor.
but with the historic overlay so that it's not hideous.
Right.
Yeah, so, you know, the scale.
I mean, that I actually have, I personally have less heartburn about that.
Well,
So,
No, that's fine. I mean, that, the thing is, that doesn't.
well, I know, but you're talking to someone that's
Who lives here and
Who
sees
lives
it every day.
right
No, no,
next
and that's
door
fine, but I
to
mean,
what's
As
happening.
opposed, to, I mean, we all live here. I mean, that's,
Yeah,
You walk out your front door.
yeah, but that's like, again, that's like, that to me, you know, a lot of the character, a lot of cities, you know, predates zoning, predates all of these things. And so that's like, I have way less.
Here we are.
So-
the other
This
one,
is what we're talking
is
about.
there
That's
a attachment
Jennifer's
A?
house.
That's good.
so let's, instead of talking hypotheticals,
Oh, no.
why don't we look at this, the space across the street and look at what's around it? And does the overlay really fit that, or do we want something intermediate step? You've got this building across the
I was
street.
gonna say, if there's a block scale building here, it seems to me that it wouldn't be out of character except for the two houses adjacent.
And Henry Hill's house right next door.
Yeah. I mean,
Right, and there's basically light industrial behind it.
yeah, and a commercial lot right behind it that,
on the backside.
and so, I mean,
See, there it is.
yeah, so that's
That's
what's going over there on,
And that's not what your vision is for the,
I don't necessarily have a vision. I just think that I want, you know, more of that, right? More of the high density, but how do you make it look the right way? And I don't know what also the right way is
right,
pretty.
but you also mentioned
Yeah.
a
yeah,
vibrant
that's
commercial
what we're
downtown.
thinking about.
And I mean, that's, if you went back, say, 50, 70 years ago, that's what they were thinking for that, and that's what we're thinking now too.
50 years ago, there was pawn shops and bars.
Okay,
That wasn't a very
further back
vibrant.
then. Let's go back, let's rewind a little bit further, okay?
Overlay zone is a requirement. They're meeting here.
Oh, yeah, so, yeah, I mean, oh, can you pull that back up? Cause what that overlay zone did, like, literally, they designed this building like very well for that overlay.
So they were required,
Yeah.
they were, yeah,
They
so that's
were-
what I'm saying. They were
yeah,
required
they
to
were-
design it a certain way that fit the
Yeah.
character of the rest. of
Right, and I'll just say where we get into some difficulties when we start applying it places where, like, when I wrote it, I specifically wrote it for the geographies that we had, right? I mean, that was sort of what the deal was. And so we had, we can see right here, I should just always grab the point. I always end up using the pointer at a certain point. So you can see there's two volumes essentially right here, 1, 2, right? And then it steps back for a higher portion. It steps down to the neighboring residence over here. It steps down to the neighboring residence over here, right? This height is intended to sort of match these heights over here and the adjacent house. Now, if you've got a single story, if you've got a single story adjacent house, trying to achieve something like this proves very difficult. Also, like starting to like get some of the rhythm for the spot. If you've got a narrow house, potentially achieving some of that rhythm is more difficult, right? And
but this was really well done, and
there's,
that's what we're talking about. What we're kind of talking about as where we're coming from is that we could do this and maybe do the rest of the city like this. In other words, our thinking could be.
and
But some of the rest of the city, that would be really out of character with the other neighborhoods.
Well,
I mean, it's not historical buildings.
no, but I mean, it's not also.
I think
a
you're talking
boxy-
about the other commercial areas.
Well, what I'm thinking about, it's not a boxy building, like a commercial
Well, he
building.
could have designed the flat roof building.
You know, if you go out to the Central Plaza, that's not historic at all.
Yeah, it's like the video was saying, when you do things to prevent, you end up with something unanticipated.
Mhm.
And that's why I'm saying is there's some sort of middle ground that allows a little more
It's
flexibility.
probably something like if you're adjacent to this zone, or, if you're at a place where you're butting up against the zone, then there's some needs to be probably some sort of wording, some word, yeah, so that it's not, necessarily blocked by, I mean, that is so vague. I mean, I understand, we're, what I always describe it as building a gray city with black and white code. So like, that's almost impossible task
Yeah.
and it's very subjective. But that's basically what you're proposing. I mean, I think that's what we're kind of talking around. Like, if you're at an adjacent zone and there's a zone change, then what would that look like? I don't know if I want to go down that rabbit hole is the thing with the code, because that seems fraud.
Yeah, so, okay, I kind of got it, so that guy, when he encourages, and I should have just kept it planned for a little bit, he says, he starts talking about building types, and he starts describing, a community in terms of building types. And I actually think that might actually be the way to sort of start cracking this issue, where we're sort of like, okay, how about this type of building in this location?
So if you were saying, so it's a commercial or a mixed use building X, if it's just a multifamily Y.
Right, or like the way he describes it is like the scale of a 4-unit, a 4-unit apartment that would be about this scale, just the first building. So he describes, he's got a whole list of various types of buildings, and then we can actually, if we consider those various types, potentially we can sort of start crafting, okay, this is what we envision this portion of the community as. This is what we envision this portion of the community as. And that way we can actually start having a dialogue around this is what I actually think should be there, in a way that we can craft some code.
Could we get something like a visual Legos going?
Visual Legos.
Well, because part of his thing was, there was a scale there of little buildings, remember? And, they were actually laid out, like, in other words, this is the size of a apartment building, this is the size of a, so you can actually kind of get a visual of what things really kind of fit together.
Yeah, I think that makes
I think
sense.
one of the things that you just said there, Fred, was as far as what we envision is sort of a permissive versus being a restrictive. Right, so if we're envisioning something, this is what we would permit and what we want.
Yeah.
Versus what you're saying as far as it being just a restriction of what we can.
I've got a question about what's allowed and if it can be regulated. So a lot of concerns, like across the street, there's multiple lots empty. Okay, so no one wants to see this enormous building taking up 3 lots and going way, just this monstrosity. Is there any way to limit the number of lots you can combine to build one structure?
Because if those 2 lots right there were
3.
combined into one building.
3,
It's 2.
is it
There's
2?
2 left because the
2 left, okay,
houses-
sorry.
But it could end up being something the size of this.
Yes,
Right, so is there
Well,
any
that's-
kind of zoning that would limit, like,
that's the block.
having one building covering 2 parcels?
I think that's what he's saying is that for the use piece, and or I guess what the presentation was talking about was like, if it was this type of building, so if it's a mixed use like that, if it's one of those, then here are the limits for that. If it's just a quad, then maybe that changes the way it will look. And it's that permit, it's sort of like, what do you want it to look like?
Right, and they showed the same density with the smaller building and then that long, that's what we're trying to avoid, that long monstrosity,
Right.
that elephant.
I would argue it could depend. So I'm looking at the lot like where Winoker's, the dentist is. And if that disappeared,
What are you looking at?
Where the
well,
dentist
so
is.
hypothetically speaking, so right, the lot where the dentist is, where Winoker's building is, where his
Oh.
office is, where his office is.
And that is
So you
not
have
in
the
the
empty lot.
historic
Right, yeah,
district.
so that whole thing there,
Uh-huh.
from a development standpoint, a developer would say, if we have quote unquote a clean slate and we can look at the dentist office plus that vacant lot, they probably would want to combine that and put in a larger, that would continue to look.
And that would be appropriate.
From the Valkyrie, et cetera, on down, so I don't think we can, or I don't know that I want to recommend like.
But,
Can
but
you
as
say
Fred
that?
said, that's outside the historic
Yeah.
district.
So,
Can
So-
you provide us
But as
that?
Fred pointed out, that's outside the historic district, so we
Right.
could make this a historic
Right.
district specific.
But I don't think like, I think some people would argue putting that type of structure where the dentist offices may not be the appropriate.
right,
Yeah, but
and so
they-
that's a good point, because I think we all sort of acknowledge that. And I think part of the question then fundamentally gets to, okay, where do we want block scale buildings? And where do we want the house scale buildings? And then we can start sort of talking about, okay, what does this house scale building look like? And I will say too, where we want block scale buildings, I know that Jennifer doesn't like the downtown riverfront zone. Those standards are different than the rest of the downtown zone. The rest of the downtown zone actually have much higher standards than the downtown riverfront zone. And so I'll just throw that out there. I'd be happy to go through those things, but maybe we don't want to get going through that. Let's look at a couple of these blocks and then just sort of ask the question. All right, you got the Google Maps again. All right, this half block here, is that house scale or block scale?
Which one is
Is that
that?
across the street?
There's City Hall right there to the right of the image,
So it's next door to City Hall.
next door to City Hall.
Between City
We've got-
Hall and the blue house that's falling down.
We've got a big vacant lot of house that's falling down,
Two lots, isn't it? It's two.
2 lots right there. This is 2 lots,
In the black
or one
house?
big one.
The black house is on the end, then the blue house that's falling down, then two empty lots.
Yeah, but
Right, so is that block scale or house scale?
house scale.
I would argue that that's block scale. I would-
Well-
And I'm the intermediate. I think it should
It's all.
Curtis is Goldilocks.
It is kind of, though, I mean, to that point, it probably is like the average, right? I mean, that's kind of where we're at, where you have block scale building here, house on the other end, it's almost a continuum between the two.
But it's not a deep lot either.
No, it's,
So it's.
So you
There's
have-
also
That
like
restricts.
a driveway that just.
And you have to look at what's across the street
Yeah.
too, which
Yeah.
is houses.
Yeah.
And then there's 2 houses, well, one's gonna be coming down. probably
Well, and
next year.
then there would be that other one on the, next to Jennifer's house being built too, that we just looked at.
right, which
Yeah.
changes the averages for the block.
Right,
And there are, I mean, of course, there are the apartments behind it. So let's-
Separate that, like my block is across the street and it's
Vote
all
on that.
Well, and then also taking into consideration that where the hotels and townhomes are, that hasn't fully developed out, so there's vacant lots behind it that are also going to develop.
and they might combine those.
If they can get them.
I don't know, I'm agreeing with you, Curtis. I'm liking the intermediate option.
I'm sorry?
I'm liking that intermediate option.
That,
So this is a good example of it.
right. I think that the overlay is good for some of the areas that Jennifer mentioned. And I think kind of an intermediate stuff is better for others. It's a tough call.
I'm just curious, to step back just a minute. Because where the dentist's office is in the lot just south of that is not in your historic neighborhood, because they're not historic buildings. I'm assuming that's why it's jigged around them. But can you impose those same standards if something else gets built there?
Yeah, so how it works is the historic standards for the downtown primarily reference the MUPC zone standards. And the MUPC zone standards are fairly good. So And I could show you those just so you can get,
But the answer is basically yes.
Okay, that's the only one. So that kind of shades what goes further south. And whether or not they could buy the back lot, I don't know. In our neighborhood, someone tried to buy part of the lot, and the person who owns it, who hasn't done anything, is not wanting to sell that in parts at all.
So play this out just for us. What if we did the use-based piece for this specific lot? Like what would, so if it's this type of building, has these kinds of allowed, or like these kinds of
so what I,
height requirement, everything else? Or-
that's what I would do is if you want to try and find an intermediate scale, then I'll try and figure out how to exactly to craft that intermediate scale. I'll try to bring you guys back something.
For that one block. So what kind of consensus, who would prefer just the overlay? I know Jennifer, are there,
So I am willing to, I'm not a completely like rigid person. I just feel like, okay, great, like 23 years ago, somebody decided that we want to push businesses all the way down here without considering the fact that there were still homes and people living there. And there are still people and homes there. And so I think that needs to be considered. And it wasn't, and we have empty storefronts in downtown, so we should be filling those up first. And so I'm not completely rigid. I have no problem looking at an intermediary thing, but I don't think we need to have across the street from homes, things that don't look like, or things that look like they just don't jive with our historic downtown. I mean, we have this painting up here in our chambers, and it's our beautiful historic downtown, and then what? We're gonna put like the townhouses up here?
But they're different standards, and I mean, so I'll just keep on referring to, you pull up the,
Kate, did you have something you want to
Yeah,
say?
actually, I would like to make just two things really quick. I think we do need to consider where downtown is going to grow. If we want to have a vibrant community, we do need to consider that we need more commercial space at some point, whether that we push further west or whatever it might be. The second, and I've heard this, stated from a couple of different sources, that we have empty storefronts. We're in a unique situation right now where one person literally has several of the storefronts tied up, and we can't move them.
It's not only that, that's a we're looking at the long term. The short term is we've got some empty storefronts. We've got a vibrant, restored downtown for the most part. There's going to be a few empty ones, and that's kind of like growing pains. But I think most of us here are looking at 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years down the road.
Well, the thing is though, that 40 or 20, 40 people coming off the bridge are going right up and down State Street. State Street now is bad. Any more expansion at State Street, to me, Main Street seems kind of not real great, because there's so much traffic right now. If you want to come out and make a left-hand turn off of 6th Street and come down to make a turn during the day, there's a lot of times when you're sitting there for like 5 minutes at the corner to try to get out. I mean, there's a lot of traffic, and there's even, I don't know if anybody's noticed how much stuff is getting built up on the top of, Vida Springs Road. All you have to do is go up to the top of Vida Springs Road, go down, Skyline or Sunset, and you see 100 houses that are over on the right-hand side that were just not.
But ultimately, that has to happen, and that's going to happen.
Well, why are we talking about building up a 2-lane street as downtown? We should be talking about another area that can
And
get
that'll still have the
4
traffic going
lanes.
through it.
But that's also addressed. I mean, there's a transportation system plan that we did last year. I mean, those things have, realistically, those things have been addressed. The city, is pretty clear on what needs to happen. I think what we're talking about is a commercial, every small town every town in Oregon realistically is fighting the balance of housing versus industrial and commercial property. And commercial property, for the most part, is at deficit in a lot of places, and it's, you know, including here, I mean, or was. And so we have to think about okay, so we're at 10,000 now, we're gonna be at what, 13, 14,000 in 30, 20, 30 years. So what is that? What are the commercial space requirements? And where's that gonna go? The downtown has been a focus, and many would argue, and I would argue, will continue to be a focus and should be. And so how do we allow for that sort of organic expansion? It's not like it's flipping a switch that we're gonna have buildings
No,
tomorrow.
but all I'm saying is to ignore the amount of traffic that's going up and down the street right now, to put more people trying to get in and out of driveways and that kind of stuff so that you can go, supposedly to go shopping. I mean, that's just, have you tried to get through the intersection down from 51 and Main Street? You know, I mean, it's just terrible right now.
I mean, I
not
think
gonna-
that's subjective. I mean, I live downtown too. I mean, that's subjective.
You don't get to that intersection?
Well, sure, but I mean, there's the transportation system plan, I obviously identified that the three-way stop is sort of one of those things. And it's.
I think what you're getting at is the traffic plan is something separate
Yes.
and the development is
Well, yeah, but
irrelevant.
It's not, I would say it's irrelevant,
Not-
but it's,
No,
But the
traffic
infill we're
knowledge
talking about is
development. Yeah, yeah.
irrelevant. It's
So, I
a
mean-
very small amount. The
And-
infill downtown is a very minuscule
Right.
amount.
traffic.
Okay, but wouldn't
Yeah.
it be better to try to focus more on that stuff,
But the thing is-
south and west?
So
I mean,
there's a transportation and land use connection. Ultimately, you want to have people living close to destinations to have alternatives. And that's one thing that the city's tried to do for years. And it's something that, I mean, makes a whole lot of sense. Now, your point about that intersection, we asked the community about that intersection. We said, you want us to try and put a turn lane into it? You want us to try and put a traffic signal there? And the answer was no, because folks didn't want downtown to be given over to the car. The answer was, and so what the transportation system plan specifically tried to do is build out a better transportation network, so people have alternative ways to get through the community.
But there aren't any alternative ways.
Sure there
That's
are,
right.
sure there are, because when they fly up Main Street and get pissed off about waiting in that line, they just cut in to the southbound lane to turn left onto D Street. I see it every day.
Oh, well, listen, they go through my neighborhood too. You know, I mean, I know that. I live over on Sixth Street, you know, that's where a lot of people are coming and going to try to get away from the perfect intersection that you're talking about, you know?
I don't think anyone's arguing it's perfect. I think the TSP,
Well, I mean.
the TSP, I mean, it's a 20-year transportation study, right?
It's just like everything that we do. We weigh competing interests.
Yeah.
And then the competing interests that we weigh there are we gonna give our downtown to traffic? Are we gonna keep it as it has been designed for pedestrians?
Right.
And the answer was, and economic development, economic vitality, and all of that stuff. What the community said was, we want downtown to stay the way it was.
And you used a perfect example of doing something different, like Dallas.
Yeah.
They basically built another commercial area, and look what happened to downtown.
Yeah,
Oh, they
and
disseminated.
I said that before, like, I don't,
He's not knocking Dallas.
I don't want to talk down about our fellow community, but like, I mean, seriously, the city made the concerted decision, and it was a wise decision. We have additional capacity. Where are we gonna put this? They said, you know what? We want downtown to be vital. We want our downtown to have the focus of development for the foreseeable future. And so they did. And I'll say that we are reaping the benefits of, in the downtown, for a decision that they made 20+ years ago.
Well, all I'm saying is that if we continue to put emphasis on commercial, going this way, you know, maybe
We,
not.
It's sort of a foregone conclusion. I mean, unfortunately, it's part of the comprehensive, I mean, it's part of the plans, it's part of.
It's part of the plan and we have, we're talking about infill.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, let's not get distracted. Let's keep our eye on the squirrel. Infill.
I'd like to ask a question. This is Liz Quaver. I appreciate and hear many valid points. I believe that it's imperative that we have that commercial overlay to foresee the growth of our city for many, many, many years to come. And I think it's at the same time super important to honor the homes that are there and keep that balance. I'm so glad that we are having these conversations because I think that the conversations that the people in the past had to keep the commercial feel, or not the commercial feel, but downtown, have that be the focal point of our town, and to keep people coming to downtown we really are starting to benefit from that, like Fred said. So I wanted to ask, when you originally did the overlay, why were the areas that Jennifer brought up that are missing? Why, does anybody know why or recall why those were left out originally?
I do.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of new members on the historic planning committee.
Well, first of all, we had a little bit of, how should I say, code fatigue. We were rewriting the code. It was the third code that we started from scratch in less than 2 years, was it, Fred? We had code fatigue and we had so much time to devote to each topic. And we looked at the three areas, which include the block across the street, the block that we're looking at right now, and the block behind Jennifer's house. And we looked at the surrounding areas and we thought, and also there's the fact when we're pushing a new code, if we make a lot of changes, code can get pushed back. People don't want, if they see something that really bugs them, we had to make something that we knew we could get past. And that was part of the decision too. Now we can, 2020 hindsight, we maybe should have included those areas. We're looking at them now. I think that that maybe some of them should have the overlay and maybe some should have some modified overlay, but it happened and it was basically code fatigue is what I would give the reason as why it happened.
I think it would be important to redo the overlay, but I'm also brand new here and I'm just trying to listen and hear what everyone has to say. But I guess that maybe I don't understand the cons so much of what the overlay, a new overlay will do. And basically is that because I think Fred said something about we could get some pushback, right? That's why we would
generate a bunch of applications to push through big block scale buildings and everything that we're trying to address.
Yeah.
But again, that could have happened back then too, when we were working on the code. So we maybe had kicked the can down the road and now we're at where the can is.
Right.
And we need to decide, is it a risk we're taking? And the consensus on the historic preservation was that it is a risk we're taking.
So Jennifer, could you tell us again which of the three areas we were looking at?
So directly across the street,
Okay,
directly across the driveway,
okay.
and then directly across the street from the movie theater.
The movie theater, which is.
East of the movie theater,
Yeah. No,
the half block.
Which one's the one, without the name, it was on the side, so having a little trouble trying to. This is. Right.
So the third one would be, so this is the second one. I hear Curtis saying that he wants some modified version for the second one. You want me to try and come up with some sort of modified overlay for this one? At least to look at, to kick around a little bit.
I guess the question I have when it comes to the use piece, which is what we started with,
Yeah.
is what's the intersectionality
Yeah, the use would be the same sort of allowed uses.
But
Just.
no, I'm talking intersectionality of traditional zoning
Yeah,
versus this kind, I mean, like, cause I'm having a hard time wrapping, I mean, in cities that have actually implemented this,
yeah.
is it just for specific, I assume it's just for very geographically specific areas? Or I mean, it seems daunting to try to do this on a city scale, or citywide scale, but maybe that's, I mean, like, I guess, how far do you want to get, like, I mean, sort of like, how far do you want to go?
Yeah, okay, so, dude, that's such a good question. A lot of people do this like in specific areas.
Yeah, okay.
So it's like sort of like a specific sort of area that they go in and then define, hey, this is what these type of buildings look like. And this is how they relate to each other and all that sort of stuff.
It's not really citywide.
That being said, like, I do think that if you came up with some sort of framework that worked, you could fit. I think I've told both you guys this before. Zoning is based on 3 components. I like to call it, anybody
Oh,
remember?
yeah, it's terrible.
FUD.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's form, use, and geography, right? And so what zoning has done forever is focused on the use and the geography, right? And what has just sort of recently been embraced more and more and more is the form component of it. And so just as you apply uses and geography through a city, you could equally apply form and geography through a community to achieve that. Now, am I saying we should do that as part of this? Absolutely not, but I mean, we could sometime potentially. And it would be interesting. It would be way different.
It almost seems though, when we're talking in just specifically infill,
Yeah.
it's really hard to balance like what the infill mindset with existing zoning and,
The vision
And-
versus where we're at now.
yeah,
And-
I just like, it's like a bridge too far in my brain.
It's yeah, and it's exactly right. And I mean, just imagine if you're designing so much based on how your neighbor is, then you've designed a building that will be there for potentially 50 years. And you've done it based on your neighbor. Well, if your neighbor then tears down their building, or if the building goes away, then all of a sudden you've got a building designed for something that's not there. So
Exactly.
But within the
You know.
historic zone, like my building's not gonna only be there for 50 more years because you can't, I mean, it takes.
But
Such an
and
act
I'm
of
not talking
Congress to
just
tear it
about
down.
I'm not just talking about the historic
Yeah.
zone, but
But
I
I'm
will
saying-
I will tell you that there are some buildings that if you have to design to your neighbor, it's gonna be you're gonna be shrinking down your building to accommodate.
That's
your-
why I think an intermediate step would be good for some of these areas.
Well,
Not necessarily all of them, but at least.
Yeah, but especially the ones that are adjacent, like we're talking about the average of historic overlay and then just right outside.
Well, like
adjacent.
across the street, you've got this, you've got that, and then you've got this new house right there. So and then you've got a light industrial behind it, which is completely different. So
are these the ones that
it's
are-
just, I think if we have an intermediate step, we can avoid what are nightmares, not make people build to this or build to that.
But to your point earlier, you were talking about block scale that still fit the,
Right, which is what I consider intermediate in my brain.
yeah, no, and I think that's like,
Yeah.
that's what,
Small.
that's your job, I guess,
Yeah.
probably for this, is like, how do you what are the standards for block scale that mimic, or at least, and I mean, it's so subjective.
Yeah,
So
and I mean, all right, so based on this, and I don't want to kick this around for like a whole long time. I think we kind of got someplace. Even if it didn't feel like we kind of got someplace, I actually think that it's really helpful. And so we've been here for an hour and a half now at this point. What I would just say is I will attempt to come up with something that tries to sort of a transition, for lack of a better word, a transitional sort of approach where it tries to do something to be in the middle. I will try my best to do that. I don't know when you'll see that, but I will try and work on something like that.
The
I
other,
feel like there's other communities that have navigated this to some extent. I mean, Ashland comes to mind, and that kind of, that blending of that residential and those commercial areas, and how do you accommodate that, to still make it feel like it all kind of mixes and belongs together?
Yeah.
there's another positive aspect to going to an intermediate step. We're concerned about these applications rolling in if someone sees a change. It's an intermediate step. People will probably say, that still works with my future plans. And we won't see something we don't want to get built while we're trying to pass it.
I mean, ultimately, I think the block, I mean, for me, I see block scales being like the right way to go. It's just a matter of how to, but in terms of for this area down here, I just, for the mixed use pieces, but how do you make them?
Well, it is.
Well, I mean, again, it's also subjective, but like you want to, I feel like there's probably a way to thread that needle.
Right. Yeah, there was
Like a.
my- I'll tell this story real quick. And then we can get out of here. My first job was on Whidbey Island, up in Washington. It was a nice little community. I always ask people, what is the tallest building on Main Street? And people would be like, they'd say the doghouse. And I'd be like, on the other side of the street, what's the tallest building on the other side of the street? And no one knew. Like literally no one knew. Why? Because the building was a 2-story building that stepped back to an upper story that no one could see from the street. And so everybody was like, when I said, no, it's, I think it was like Flat Rock Architects or something that did it. When I would say that, they would be like, no. And I'm like, go out and look at it. Like, you got to get the right angle, but you'll see it. And so potentially something like that could, with step back stuff, or even rough pitch sort of approaches,
Right. Step back, yeah.
or stuff like that. Potentially we can get to some sort of,
Midpoint.
to some sort of midpoint.
How about midpoint step backs? Why don't we call it that?
Potentially we can do something like that. So I mean, I'll monkey with it, and I'll try and show it to both you folks. Planning Commission, we will be talking more about residential standards as well. There are some good things to consider with like hiding height and roof pitches and stuff, using dormers and stuff that can be done. So there's stuff like that we might want to consider. And, you know, some of the things that we've done with the historic residential overlay, like consider your neighbors a little bit. So some of that stuff might be appropriate. Just in general. So.
Can
we
we
will.
work on the places by you, Jennifer?
I mean, Brad, Mr. Harris,
Pardon me?
Mr. Harris, he's, like we said in the last meeting, he's done a great job of being considerate of the fact that he's building a ginormous building next to single family home. So I don't think it's too much to ask.
So I will say it's gonna be a fun but very busy year. Like, I do think that we have some projects coming in that are gonna be some big ones, and I know that we have things like downtown parking plan, the central townage plan that are big, big projects, and housing needs analysis.
Can I make one more comment while we've got the planning commissions here? I know that a lot of HPC members, it's not our area. They're always very concerned about the parking for these projects and not being enough of it, particularly close to downtown.
We're aware.
I just wanted to, that's
I'll say
a,
it for you.
That's my.
Becky's on.
We have our liaison.
I'm probably the only one that doesn't bring it up because I figured it was on your plate, but a lot of members have, and it's a big concern. Okay. Sorry.
Well, before I ask for adjournment, I do want to recognize Kate for your service to the planning commission. And you will be sorely missed from planning commission, but good luck with your endeavors on city council. Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. No, planning commission has been a lot of fun, and it's true, it's a great group of people. Appreciate all the work that everyone does.
Appreciate what you've done for us. So with that,
And just so I can have it for the record, the press was here at Anshed, and she asked that this be distributed to a statement that she would like to make, and she wanted it for the record. So I'll be distributing that, and you can take it home with you. You don't have to read it here at the meeting.
with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed?
Hi.
You're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Everybody have a great holiday season. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you too.
All kinds of transitions going on.
Yeah.